1986, I took a job in an urgent care clinic just outside of Berkeley, California. It was a medical revolving door. All day long, patients with headaches and fevers and back pain circled through it. It was my job in this sea of mostly healthy patients to find the needle in the haystack, the patient in whom the symptoms represented something ominous. And sometimes I did find a case like that, usually after some clinical chord struck me as being dissonant. The patient's chief complaint was headache. I'd go into the room and I realized the patient had flicked off the light switch, a subtle sign that the bright lights were bothering her eyes, which is sometimes a symptom of meningitis. Or the patient's chief complaint was joint aches, and on exam I felt a few lymph nodes, not all that impressive, or maybe in the mouth there was a small ulcer. Things that weren't all that impressive by themselves, but together they painted a picture of a disease hitting multiple organs at the same time, a disease like a vasculitis. At the end of a long day, if I'd made one of these diagnoses, endocarditis or meningitis or lupus, I'd sometimes sit down and try to figure out what had been the pebble in my clinical shoe. What was the trigger? What got me to thinking that maybe this is something serious? Sometimes it was obvious what it was. There was a clear piece of data that had been the trigger, but oftentimes it wasn't. I think in those latter cases, what I was using, what we physicians call the eyeball test, that sense, that vague sense born of years of experience and seeing hundreds of patients, that something isn't quite right, that things aren't quite adding up. It's that sense that triggers the, I wonder if this could be, section of the experienced physician's brain. You might call it intuition, the marriage of experience and instinct. Well, today, in this age of brilliant technologies, the notion of professional intuition, of the eyeball test, indeed of professional expertise itself, is under assault. It's suspicious. It's soft. It's squishy. There's not an algorithm for it. It's not evidence-based. It's anti-democratic. It's paternalistic. In profession after profession, with battering rams formed of big data and smart algorithms, the people are attacking the professional barricades. And now it's happening in medicine. In a series of articles and books and speeches and websites, patients are urged to become their own doctors, to go onto the computer and question their doctor's diagnosis. They're egged on to buy apps and wearables and sensors that will monitor everything from the speed of their heart to the content of their sweat. They're buying do-it-yourself tests and treatments. Physicians who question this idea of tech-enabled patient self-doctoring are variously branded as Luddites or troglodytes or wagon circlers, desperately trying to hold on to their franchise against this existential competitive threat. Disruption, you see, is the order of the day, and we dinosaurs are told that we should be nice enough to just get out of the way and let it happen. I'm going to argue that medicine really is different, and that patients will always, and yes, I said always, need physicians. The democratization of healthcare is a very good thing. The technology is very exciting, but I think we can take it too far. I'm even going to make the case that a little paternalism can sometimes be a very good thing. There's no question that the healthcare system needs to be disrupted, but as we do it, we have to be very exquisitely careful about not disrupting the doctor-patient relationship. Now, don't get me wrong, I think the democratization of healthcare is a healthy trend. I think patient engagement and patient-facing technologies are largely a good thing. And clearly, we physicians have brought some of this on ourselves by resisting power sharing, by sometimes being poor communicators, by resisting transparency, by not apologizing when things go wrong. There's no question that some of the time we've got it wrong, that we've sometimes lapsed into or defaulted into command and control mode. The doctor as God is not the right model here, but the patient as doctor is not right either. Now, I see this as a particularly important issue today because we're at a remarkable moment in the evolution of healthcare for several reasons. The first is that medicine has finally become a digital enterprise. Driven by $30 billion of federal incentive payments doled out over the last 5 years, medicine has finally gone from analog to digital. The number of doctors' offices and hospitals that had electronic health records was about 10% 6 or 7 years ago. It's about 80% today. So finally, reluctantly, and shockingly only after receiving federal subsidies, have we ditched the fax machine, the Post-it notes, the 3-ring binders, and the clipboards. That's a good thing. It's terrific that medicine has gone digital. And as that has happened, it has done what it's done in every other industry, which is to democratize the industry, to give people the tools they need to take on some of the responsibilities themselves. Let's take one example, the example of patient ownership of or access to their own medical record. You may not know this, but for the past 30 years, patients have had a right to have their medical record. Congress mandated it in the mid-90s. But in a paper hospital, think about what happened when a patient tried to exercise that right. The patient would first have to find the medical records department, which inevitably was in the basement of the hospital, in the bowels, somewhere behind the morgue. If they managed to find their way to the medical records department, they would there meet the ornery clerk who would say, "Oh, you want a copy of your medical record? Sure. It'll cost you 75 cents to photocopy it. And your record is, let's see, your record is 923 pages long." Most patients thought better of it and said, well, I don't really need my medical record all that much. In a digital healthcare system with an electronic health record, today, all that stands between a patient and her medical record is a password. The second big change relates to money. 10 years ago, a decade ago, about 10% of American patients had health insurance plans with deductibles or copays of $1,000 or more. Today, that number is 50%, and it's growing fast. Faced with the prospect of an enormous deductible or copay, who wouldn't want to take a stab at Googling or crowdsourcing their diagnosis? And as patients do that, they'll get it right a fair amount of the time. The patient has some symptoms, looks it up, and says, oh, I have benign back pain, or I have non-ulcer dyspepsia, or I'm having an asthma flare. They'll be right a lot of the time, but not always. Because hidden among these seemingly ho-hum diagnoses is a killer that may not carry a warning label. Now, will computers ever get good enough to take over for doctors as diagnosticians? Maybe. But they're not there today. I don't believe they'll be there in the next few years. When will they get there? I suspect they'll get there when computers also learn to write award-winning poetry, to skate in the Olympics, and to become the CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. Now, patients becoming their own doctors, I see two major problems that I want to describe to you. The first is the patient looks things up and comes to believe that they have some dread disease whose symptoms resemble those of their own, but not quite. A few months ago, I got a call from my 22-year-old son, Benji. His voice dripping with anxiety, he said, "Dad, I have glaucoma and diabetes." Now, I knew something was up because I was pretty sure he had no idea what glaucoma was. I said, "Benj, what makes you think you have glaucoma and diabetes?" The answer, of course, you know. He looked up his symptoms on WebMD. You'll be pleased to know that he does not have glaucoma or diabetes. He's a perfectly healthy 22-year-old. That's one set of problems that we're going to see. The other, I think, is more worrisome. The patient tries to be their own doctor, looks things up, and is reassured that nothing serious is going on, whereas a more experienced physician might look at the same constellation of signs and symptoms and realize that more testing, or maybe just further thinking, is warranted. Now, in today's age of brilliant computers and driverless cars, why is this so hard? It seems like it shouldn't be. Well, I think it wouldn't be if we could simply hand to the computer a set of 5 symptoms or signs and say to it, solve this case, just like Alex Trebek handed to IBM's Watson computer on that famous Jeopardy match. But that's not how medicine works. As an internist and a hospitalist, When I see a sick patient, I'm collecting or culling hundreds, sometimes 200 facts. Everything from the patient's chief complaint, to past medical history, to family history, to the heart rate, the blood pressure, the lung exam, to the travel history, to the tone of her voice, the look in her eyes, the sweat in her brow, the slight tremor in her right hand. Distilling these 200 facts down into the 5 salient ones that you might want to feed into the computer turns out to be an enormously complex cognitive act. On top of that, even the answers to seemingly simple questions sometimes are surprisingly nuanced. Let's take the matter of timing. The patient who has a history of a heart attack 3 days ago is vastly different from the one who has a history of a heart attack 3 years ago. And then there's tone of voice. The patient who comes in and says, "Doctor, I've been having some chest pain," is very different than the one who says, "Doctor, I'm having chest pain." The computer, the software that can't account for those differences, is going to get it wrong a lot. Let's also consider today's growing array of apps and wearables and sensors. Some of them are really, really marvelous. An app that allows the parent of a diabetic child to monitor her kid's sugar and even to suggest changes in insulin dose. Well, that's just magical. It's fabulous. Some people really find that monitoring their steps helps them engage in healthier behaviors. I, on the other hand, lost my Fitbit in the first 6 weeks, as you can probably tell, and I suspect I'll find it again hidden under a clothes pile in my closet the next time I move. But the so-called quantified self movement is peddling the idea that having patients monitor minute-to-minute variations in things like heart rate or blood pressure is going to turn out to be of immense benefit to the patient's health. I have to tell you that I take care of desperately ill patients in intensive care units, patients whose lives are hanging by a thread. And knowing their heart rates variations minute to minute isn't particularly helpful. How those kinds of data are going to be helpful to a healthy 30-something is frankly beyond me, at least at this point. Now, as much as I worry about overdiagnosis like my son, or misdiagnoses, or the signal-to-noise ratio that we're going to confront in a major way with all sorts of patient-facing wearables and apps, I worry about those things a lot. But the thing I worry most about is psychological harm and anxiety. I want to tell you the story of Dr. Franz Ingelfinger. Dr. Ingelfinger was the editor of the New England Journal of Medicine, our most famous journal, from 1967 to 1976, and at the time, one of the most towering figures in all of medicine. Dr. Ingelfinger was a gastroenterologist who specialized in diseases of the esophagus and the stomach, and as tragic irony would have it, developed esophageal cancer, cancer of the organ that he was one of the world's experts in. I call this issue Ingelfinger's predicament. What happened was Dr. Ingelfinger went from doctor to doctor seeking advice about what to do about his cancer. Each one of these doctors was either a close professional colleague of his, in many cases, they were one of his trainees. And remember, Dr. Ingelfinger was a legend in healthcare at the time. As he went to each of these doctors seeking advice, every single one of them said to him, after hearing the story, said to him, "Well, Franz, what would you do?" In an article he wrote in his own journal, in the New England Journal of Medicine, soon before his death, he recounted this experience and how the experience of seeing physicians who kept on saying to him, "Tell me what you would like me to do," left him immobilized, and his family immobilized with anxiety. Finally, he went to see a wise physician friend, a courageous physician friend, who sat down with him, knee to knee, looked him in the eye, and said, "Franz, what you really need is a doctor." Today, in this age of remarkable technologies, the democratization of healthcare, and the economic forces that will drive patients to do more of this themselves, Ingelfinger's predicament is not only going to be faced by physician patients, it's going to be faced by all patients. This question of when you need to see a trusted and caring expert who can take on some of the responsibility, who can interpret the data for you, who can give you the information that you need to be an active partner in decision-making, who can sometimes, yes, sometimes, be a little paternalistic. That question is no longer a question just for physician patients, it's going to be a question for all of us. The answer here is not to roll back the clock, to treat doctors as gods, to put doctors back on the pedestal. There are amazing things happening through the democratization of healthcare, through patients having the information that they need and deserve. And there will be many, many times where patients armed with that kind of information and armed with new and breathtaking tools will be able to help take care of themselves, sometimes even to act as their own doctors. And in those cases, doing that will enable them to have better health, it'll be more convenient, and there'll be lower costs. That is fabulous. But some of the time, just like Dr. Engelfinger, what patients really need is a doctor. Thank you so much. Thank you.